Hello and welcome to the 62nd edition of the GreenWave podcast by SYNI International. I'm SYNI, your host, and today's topics are the world's oceans, who owns them, who is wrecking them, and why a room full of university students in Portugal might have done more for its future in a single weekend than a decade of ministerial handshakes. SYNI International was a partner at the Blue Futures Conference, held at the Nova School of Business and Economics, located in Carcavelos just outside of Lisbon at the end of February. Before I explain why that mattered to us, let me give you two numbers that should be sitting on every investor's desk, every policymaker's briefing sheet, and every dinner table where someone claims to care about the planet. The ocean economy generates over $2.5 trillion a year in global GDP and supports north of 100 million jobs. If it were a country, it would be the world's fifth largest economy. And the portion of that economy's source, the ocean itself, that is genuinely protected from destructive activity sits at roughly 3%. 3%, not 30. 3. The gap between those two figures is the story of our generation's relationship with the sea. We extract from it at industrial scale, depend on it for protein, trade, energy, climate regulation, and tourism, and then protect a sliver so thin you could lose it behind a postage stamp on a globe. The 30% target, known in policy circles as 30 by 30, was agreed under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, agreed in 2022. One of the goals of GBF is that 30% of the world's oceans should be effectively conserved and managed by 2030. Today, designated marine protected areas cover about 10% of the surface, a significant jump from 8% at the start of 2025. That sounds like progress until you look at what designated means in practice. Strip away the paper parks, the areas that carry a protected label while still permitting bottom trawling, dredging and industrial extraction, and the share of ocean that is fully or highly protected drops back to around 3%. The David Attenborough documentary Ocean was screened at the opening of the Blue Futures Conference, which was a smart choice by the student organisers. The film is visually stunning in ways you expect from a production of that calibre, yet the sequences that stick are not the beauty shots. They are the footage of bottom trawling, weighted nets dragged across the seabed, turning centuries of accumulated structure into a ploughed field. Trawlers cover roughly 5 million square kilometres of ocean floor every year. Over the past 6 decades, they have discarded an estimated 437 million tonnes of non-target catch, marine life hauled up and thrown back dead because it was not the species someone wanted to sell. The carbon cost alone runs to an estimated 370 million metric tonnes of CO2 released annually from disturbed seabed sediments, nearly double the emissions from fuel combustion across the entire global fishing fleet. That number tends to surprise people. We talk about shipping emissions and fishing fuel, yet the seabed itself, once ripped open, becomes a carbon source. The documentary also made a case that our audience will find professionally interesting. Marine protected areas, when they are properly enforced, generate measurable economic returns that spill over into surrounding waters and communities. The mechanism is straightforward biology. Fish inside a protected zone grow larger, live longer, and reproduce more. Larger females produce disproportionately more eggs. Those offspring do not respect boundaries. They drift into adjacent waters, replenishing fisheries that would otherwise decline. Research published in Science showed that waters near well-managed reserves see catch per unit of fishing effort increase by 12 to 18%. In Fiji, traditional communities that established locally managed marine areas saw fish populations increase by 260% within 5 years, and fishing families reported a 35% rise in income. The protection paid for itself. and then some. One global study across 34 countries found that every dollar invested in ocean protection returns roughly $20 in combined benefits to fisheries, tourism, storm buffering, and carbon storage. That is an investment thesis. It is also the kind of evidence base that should embarrass any government still permitting industrial trawling inside areas it labels as protected. Which brings me to why Synergy International chose to partner with Blue Futures specifically, because we are not short of conferences to attend. The sustainability calendar is so packed that you could spend every working week of the year sitting in a conference hall listening to someone read bullet points off a slide while the audience checks email. The UN Conference of the Parties process has become the crown jewel of this phenomenon. Enormous gatherings that produce communiques full of conditional language, followed by implementation that moves at the speed of diplomatic inertia. COP after COP, the emissions curve has not bent to match the rhetoric. We say this not to dismiss multilateral process, because framework agreements really do matter, like the coming Montreal framework mentioned earlier, but to note that conferences have become an industry unto themselves, and the ratio of talking to doing has drifted somewhere uncomfortable. Blue Futures was different for a simple reason. It was organised by students, not hosted by students as a side event at someone else's gathering. Organised, planned, and run by the student chapter of Oikos at Nova SBE, making it the largest sustainability conference organised by students in Portugal. The theme was Ocean and the Blue Economy, Rethinking Our Ocean, Shaping Our Future. Over 2 days in late February, students, academics, policymakers, and practitioners gathered at the gorgeous Nova SBE campus set along the beach in Carcavelos to talk about ocean stewardship and the regenerative blue economy. The word regenerative matters there because it sets a higher bar than sustainable. Sustainable asks, can we keep going without collapse? Regenerative asks, can we restore what we have already damaged? And yes, there were quite a few students that ran outside the Geronimo Martins Auditorium in their wetsuits, with surfboard in tow, headed down the tunnel to the waves. The generation organising this conference will be the one managing ocean policy in 2040 and 2050. They will inherit the consequences of today's protection gaps, today's trawling permits, today's financing shortfalls. The fact that they chose to spend their time building a serious, substantive conference rather than waiting for their elders to hand them a functioning system says something about where the energy in ocean governance is moving. There is a particular kind of credibility that comes from a conference where the organisers also stay to clean up the venue. That sounds trivial. It is not. It signals ownership rather than curation, and ownership is what the ocean governance space has been missing at scale. Nova SBE deserves a mention in its own right. The university's Environmental Economics Knowledge Centre runs interdisciplinary research across marine ecosystems, blue growth, ecosystem services, coastal resilience, and sustainable policy. Their team blends economists, marine biologists, environmental scientists, and policy experts, which is exactly the kind of cross-pollination that ocean issues demand. You cannot manage the ocean as a pure ecology problem or a pure economics problem. It is both simultaneously, and the institutions that structure themselves accordingly tend to produce more useful work. One of the conference's standout contributions came from Emmanuel Gonçalves of the Oceano Azul Foundation, who delivered a situation sketch on the scientific overview of the current state of marine ecosystems and conservation. Gonçalves is a marine ecologist, chief scientist at Oceano Azul, and a professor at ISPA in Lisbon. He was instrumental in developing Portugal's national ocean strategy and has spent years working on the creation, monitoring, and implementation of marine protected areas. including the largest MPA network in the North Atlantic, located in the Azores. His perspective carries the weight of someone who has spent time not only publishing research, but also sitting in the rooms where protection decisions actually get made, and, too often, unmade. Oceano Azul has been pushing a concept that our listeners should track: the idea that the ocean should be treated as a global commons with the burden of proof reversed. Instead of requiring conservationists to demonstrate why an area should be protected, the default should be protection, with the burden falling on anyone proposing extraction to prove that the activity is sustainable. That is a radical inversion of how ocean governance currently works, where the sea is treated as open until someone fights to close a piece of it. The MPA guide, which Gonçalves helped develop, is part of that effort, a comprehensive framework for assessing what marine protected areas actually deliver versus what their designation paperwork promises. The timing of the conference also lined up with European Ocean Days, where European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen gave the opening address just days later on March 2nd. She launched the SYNI initiative, a European ocean observation system backed by €50 million from Horizon Europe over 2 years, with an international alliance intended to bring in additional funding from governments, the private sector, and philanthropy. Von der Leyen framed the blue economy as a 5 million job, €250 billion contributor to the EU, and positioned ocean observation as the foundation for smarter management, better maritime security, and a competitive blue economy. The target is a fully operational European ocean observation system by 2030. Observation matters because you cannot manage what you cannot see. Most of the ocean floor remains less well mapped than the surface of Mars. Monitoring of fish stocks, pollution, temperature, acidification, and biodiversity is patchy and unevenly funded. The gap between what we know about the ocean and what we need to know to manage it responsibly is vast. OceanEye is one attempt to close that gap, at least within European waters and through international partnerships. Yet, observation without enforcement is just expensive data collection. A satellite can show you a trawler dragging a net through a protected area at 3 a.m. Without enforcement capacity, the image is evidence of a crime that nobody prosecutes. The ocean's governance problem is not primarily a knowledge gap. We know that bottom trawling destroys habitat. We know that overfishing depletes stocks beyond recovery thresholds. We know that plastic pollution accumulates in gyres, in sediments, and in the tissues of marine organisms. We know that warming and acidification are reshaping ecosystems from coral reefs to polar waters. The deficit is political, will translate it into binding rules and funded enforcement. The High Seas Treaty, agreed in 2023 after 2 decades of negotiation, provides a legal framework for establishing marine protected areas beyond national jurisdiction. Ratification is crawling forward. The treaty exists. The political momentum to implement it at speed does not yet. The financing picture tells the story plainly. Current spending on ocean protection runs to about $1.2 billion per year. The estimated annual investment needed to meet 30 by 30 targets is $15.8 billion. That is a gap of over $14 billion a year. For context, the global ocean economy generates $2.5 trillion annually. Closing the protection funding gap would cost roughly 0.6% of the economic value the ocean provides. It is a simple question of priority. For the investor audience that GreenWave serves, ocean protection and blue economy infrastructure should be moving up the watch list. The blue economy is projected to double again by 2050. The sectors within it, renewable ocean energy, sustainable aquaculture, marine biotech, coastal resilience infrastructure, port modernization, and ocean observation technology, represent capital deployment opportunities that align with both climate and biodiversity frameworks. The EU alone is signalling serious intent through SYNI and the broader ocean governance agenda. National governments with large, exclusive economic zones, from Portugal to Indonesia to the Pacific Island states, are increasingly treating ocean management as an economic development strategy, not just an environmental obligation. Marine protected areas themselves are becoming investable through blue bond structures, debt for nature swaps, and ecosystem service payment mechanisms. The Seychelles pioneered a sovereign blue bond in 2018. Belize restructured national debt in exchange for ocean protection commitments. These are early templates. The economic case for protection, $20 returned for every dollar invested, is the kind of ratio that should make infrastructure investors pause and recalculate their ocean exposure. If a real estate fund saw those returns from a building retrofit program, the capital would arrive in weeks. The ocean has a marketing problem, not a fundamentals problem. The connection between the Blue Futures Conference and the broader policy moment is not accidental. Portugal has positioned itself as a serious player in ocean governance. Lisbon hosted the second UN Ocean Conference in 2022. Portuguese institutions, including Nova SBE and the Oceano Azul Foundation, have built credibility in the space through sustained research and advocacy. The country's Atlantic geography and its historical relationship with the sea give it a narrative and a strategic interest that few European nations can match. Portugal also holds one of the largest exclusive economic zones in Europe, stretching deep into the Atlantic around the Azores and Madeira. That ocean territory is a policy laboratory, an ecological asset, and an economic frontier that demands the kind of interdisciplinary thinking Nova SBE is producing. What made Blue Futures worth our partnership was not the keynotes or the panels alone, though the quality was high. It was the composition of the room. Students who will be running ministries, investment firms, research labs, and NGOs in 15 years, engaging with the material not as spectators, but as architects. The intergenerational dialogue the conference fostered is exactly what the ocean governance space needs, because the decisions being made today, or not made today, will land on their desks. Too many sustainability conferences fill rooms with people who already agree with each other, produce a declaration, and fly home. Blue Futures put students in direct conversation with scientists like Gonçalves, with policymakers, and with practitioners who have spent careers learning where good intentions meet institutional friction. That kind of exposure shapes careers. 3% of the ocean is genuinely protected. The machinery to reach 30% exists on paper, but is underfunded by a factor of 13. The economic case for ocean protection is strong and getting stronger. The science is clear. The policy frameworks are emerging. The capital is available. What remains scarce is the combination of political courage and institutional capacity to move from pledges to enforcement, from designated areas to genuinely managed ones, from conferences that produce documents to conferences that produce practitioners. A room full of students at Nova SBE, screening a documentary about the state of the ocean, then spending 2 days working through the economics, science, governance, and ethics of blue economy stewardship, is not going to fix the funding gap or stop a trawler fleet. That is not what conferences do. What conferences can do, when they are built by the right people for the right reasons, is form the networks and sharpen the thinking that eventually shows up in policy, in capital allocation, and in the career choices that determine who sits at the table when the decisions land. The ocean does not send delegates to conferences. It does not lobby. It does not vote. It just keeps absorbing heat, cycling carbon, feeding people, and slowly degrading under the weight of what we take and what we dump. If you have ever stood on the coast of Portugal and watched the Atlantic stretch toward the horizon, you know the feeling of something so large it resists comprehension. That vastness is part of the problem. It makes the ocean easy to ignore, easy to treat as infinite, easy to assume that someone else is managing. Nobody is managing it, not at the scale the damage requires. If the next generation of ocean stewards looks anything like the students who organise Blue Futures, there is reason to believe the trajectory can shift. Not because optimism is warranted by the data, but because the people entering the field are arriving with the right combination of scientific literacy, economic fluency, and impatience with incrementalism. They are also arriving with something their predecessors lacked, a lived awareness that the systems they inherited are failing, and a refusal to pretend otherwise while drafting another communiqué. Synergy International will continue to partner with initiatives that put substance ahead of spectacle and that invest in the people who will carry the work forward. The ocean is too large, too valuable, and too damaged for us to keep treating protection as a rounding error in the global economy. Well, that's a wrap on our 60-second GreenWave podcast episode. You already know we appreciate you sharing your time. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart, Podchaser, Boomplay, and Player FM, and feel free to love the pod, share with friends, and leave a 5-star review. If you have missed any of our LinkedIn posts or the GreenWave Gazette, you can always catch us on LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram, or visit synergy-international.net. We'll keep reflecting on the trends shaping sustainable finance and global policy. Until next time, keep riding the green wave of sustainability.